This lecture will cover physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development in late adulthood. Late adulthood is the final life stage before death. Typically begins around the age of 65 or so, and runs for hopefully as long as possible. Although that statement in itself might not be true either. So we look at this individual who is, we are going to assume, in late adulthood, and mostly because of her loose skin and gray hair and use of eyeglasses. All of those are indications that the individual has reached late adulthood. We'll begin by discussing longevity. How long a person can expect to live. We'll talk about the factors that influence longevity, and we'll talk about some of the characteristics of people that live to be 100 years of age. Then we'll discuss general physical development in late adulthood, as well as some health issues that are common. So the longest authenticated human lifespan is 122 years of age. This individual lived from 1875 to 1997. Every country has a different life expectancy that describes the average length of time that an individual born in that country can expect to live. We can break down life expectancy by ethnicity as well as gender. So, for example, it's my understanding that African American males in the United States, they have the lowest life expectancy of all groups. But when we just take away the race factor and we just look at gender, for example, men have a life expectancy of around 75, which is about 5 to 6 years younger than women, which have a life expectancy of about 81. So on average, about 79 years of age. What are some of the factors that determine life expectancy? Well, they're going to fall under biological, cognitive, and social factors. So regarding biological factors, we see that on almost all species, females outlive males. You may remember when we were talking about prenatal development that female zygotes or female fetuses are more resistant to teratogens. And so we see that females in general just have a stronger immune system and are just more biologically prepared for survival. We see that men engage in much more destructive behaviors like smoking and drinking. And we can see that vegetarian diet also contributes to a longer life expectancy, as well as religiosity. We see that Seventh-day Adventists have the longest life expectancy in the United States of 88, and so the two main characteristics of this lifestyle are the fact that they're vegetarian and the fact that they are religious. Cognitive factors. We see that people who score high in conscientiousness are associated with longer life expectancies. What is conscientiousness? It's a personality trait that describes an individual's organization, discipline, reliability, and so individuals that are more disciplined in what they eat and how they exercise and remember to take their medication and their vitamin, those individuals are more likely to live a longer life. And then when we look at social factors such as socioeconomic status, we see that a country like Monaco, which has the lowest poverty rate, also has the longest life expectancy of 90 on average. And so socioeconomic status also seems to be a predictor of life expectancy. Centenarians are individuals that live to be 100. Okinawa, Japan has the highest rate of centenarians. About 35 of every 100,000 people there live to be 100. What are some of the characteristics of this culture? Well, it's a diet that's concentrated in fish, grains, and vegetables. So they don't eat a lot of red meat. They don't eat a lot of pork or chicken. Their main source of protein is fish. They grow a lot of their own grains and vegetables. They seem to have a low stress lifestyle promoted by an island culture, and so they probably don't have as high levels of anxiety and stress as many people in American culture do, or Western culture in general. They seem to have a very strong sense of caring community, and they also seem to be physically active through tasks such as walking and gardening. So you compare that to a culture where many jobs are taking place, at a computer or at a desk, and so there's not a lot of time for physical activity. In fact, we have to schedule rigorous physical activity, for example, an hour a day or 30 minutes a day, just to compensate for the lack of physical activity throughout the day. These individuals are constantly active through walking and gardening, and they also seem to benefit from having a spiritual mindset and regular prayer. With regard to physical development in late adulthood, we see that the brain mass decreases throughout the lifespan from the ages of 20 to 90 by about 10%, most notably in the prefrontal cortex. So we actually spend the first 20 years or so of our life trying to get our prefrontal cortex to be at its optimal size and performance and ability. And this is the part of the brain that's responsible for decision making, impulse control, critical thinking, abstract thinking, a lot of those fluid intelligence features that we talked about in middle adulthood. We see that it declines continuously from the ages of 20 to 90, and so those changes are most obvious in our 70s and further on. Other changes at the physical level include neuron shrinkage, and so neurons actually become smaller as we get older and as we get into late adulthood. We also begin to lose myelin, so the process of demyelination occurs, and that's also going to influence the efficiency of neuronal communication. And then we also see a reduction in neurotransmitter production, and so we're not producing neurotransmitters as efficiently as we used to in early and middle adulthood. Sleep difficulty is also a big part of late adulthood. People who struggle with sleep are more likely to die earlier. They are likely to experience issues with their cognitive functioning, and they're also likely to have other general health issues like cardiovascular issues. We can improve sleep by avoiding caffeine, avoiding sleeping pills, and maintaining exercise routines, staying mentally active, and some people can also benefit from supplements such as melatonin. With regard to physical appearance, we see that wrinkles and age spots tend to increase. So when you compare the skin texture of a person who's 85 to someone who's 25, you're going to see a lot of differences there. People in late adulthood actually lose some of their height due to vertebrae bone loss, and they also typically experience a decline in weight due to muscle loss. Obviously, this is going to vary from individual to individual, but many people in late adulthood experience a significant decline in their muscle density due to a lack of activity. Vision is an issue that continues to be a problem in late adulthood. There are many different problems associated with vision, including the development of cataracts, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. The videos that are linked here are very helpful in explaining the difference between these. We see that with cataracts is essentially thickening of the eye lens. Those can be removed. Glaucoma is basically a condition in which the optic nerve is damaged due to fluid buildup. And then with macular degeneration, this is an issue in which we experience deterioration of the retina. About 60% of people over the age of 80 have hypertension. They have high blood pressure. About 30% over the age of 80 have had a stroke in their lifetime. Strokes are linked to general illnesses, obesity, stress, and lack of exercise. So what we want to do to prevent a stroke is going to be to exercise, manage our stress levels, and also manage our weight. Substance use and abuse. We see that research shows that moderate red wine consumption is linked to better health, so that's a positive. Unfortunately, we do see late onset alcoholism being a rising issue with the elderly community. Why is this? Well, a lot of factors contribute to alcoholism in general. Specifically in late adulthood, we see that loneliness is a big factor. The loss of a spouse can lead to depression, and depression is often associated with substance abuse, including alcoholism, and also having a disabling condition. Being diagnosed with cancer or being diagnosed with some sort of chronic health issue, that can be very depressing, and that can also lead to alcoholism in late adulthood. Of course, by now it's no secret that exercise has a long list of positive outcomes associated with it. People who exercise tend to live longer. They're less likely to develop chronic diseases like diabetes and cancer. Exercise is also shown to be effective in treating these diseases. Exercise promotes motor functioning as well as cognitive functioning. It reduces mental health issues like anxiety and depression. It also alleviates stress. And so it's very important to establish an exercise routine as early on in life as possible and to maintain it throughout late adulthood. So that concludes physical development in late adulthood. There are plenty of helpful videos attached to that PowerPoint, so I encourage you to open up that PowerPoint and watch those videos. Moving on to cognitive development in late adulthood. We have an individual here who's in late adulthood, it seems. He's lost a lot of his hair. The hair that he does has is very gray. You can see that his skin is very loose, and he's kind of staring off into the distance. We kind of have the perception that he's thinking about something, which is why I thought this picture was fitting for cognitive development in late adulthood. So with regard to cognitive development, we'll talk about cognitive functioning, work and retirement, as well as mental health. So when we talk about cognitive functioning in late adulthood, it's pretty similar to fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. You may remember those concepts from middle adulthood. So we differentiate between cognitive mechanics and cognitive pragmatics. So cognitive mechanics are synonymous with fluid intelligence. This has to do with our processing speed, our attention span, how long we can stay focused onto something. Our motor skills are also part of our cognitive mechanics, basically moving around, our reaction time, and so driving, for example, driving has to do with processing information, maintaining attention, and also responding to stimuli in the environment by accelerating and braking. And so that's why as we get older, it becomes more difficult to drive because we experience issues with all of these aspects of our cognitive mechanics. Abstract problem solving also continues to be, become more difficult as we reach late adulthood. So remember that abstract problem solving is about thinking about hypothetical scenarios. And so you see the individual playing chess there. So there's a lot of abstract problem solving that goes into chess because there's a lot of hypothetical scenarios that are being thought of in the mind. And so anytime we're talking about decisions or problems that involve simply ideas and they don't involve something that we can see, touch, taste, hear, or smell right in front of us, that's going to be an abstract problem. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about in psychology is abstract because when we're talking about people's thoughts and their decisions and cognitive mechanics and cognitive pragmatics, I cannot really show you a picture of cognitive mechanics or cognitive pragmatics. I can't really show you a picture of intelligence. I can't show you a picture of memory. These are just abstract ideas that exist in our mind. And so those just become more difficult to understand as we get older. Cognitive pragmatics, this includes linguistic abilities, so language development, professional skills like typing, and also life skills like practical stuff, changing the oil in your car, going grocery shopping. All of this stuff stays intact as we get older. It just becomes more difficult to, for example, come up with a new recipe that you've never done before all on your own, because creating something new that you've never experienced, that's an abstract problem. But being able to, make the same casserole that you've been making for the past 20 years, that really shouldn't be an issue. It might take you a little longer to do it, but it's not going to involve any sort of new creative thought process. So we do see a decline in cognitive functioning that's attributed to changes in the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. So remember, we have 4 different lobes of the brain. The frontal lobe, this includes the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making and impulse control. We have the parietal lobe, which is responsible for the perception of time as well as sensation, our sense of touch. And then we also have the occipital lobe, which is responsible for vision, and the temporal lobe, or the temporal lobe, which is responsible for hearing. And so What we see is that there's different types of attention that are influenced by the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe. So selective attention is focusing on relevant information, basically looking over through this PowerPoint slide and thinking about what it is that you want to focus on. That is the function of selective attention. Divided attention is being able to think of two different things at the same time. So being able to think of, the sound of my voice, as well as being able to look at the picture of the four different lobes and the picture of the man at the bottom on a computer, or maybe being able to look at those images at the same time and be able to think about both of them at the same time. That's going to be divided attention. And maybe also trying to think about, what you're going to eat for lunch, or what it is that you have to do later this evening. All of that is divided attention. Sustained attention is staying focused for an extended period of time. And so for many people, it might be difficult to listen to a 30-minute lecture on, late adulthood development. But it'd be certainly very difficult for a child. But as we get older, we have more impulse control. But this does weaken as we reach late adulthood. As we reach late adulthood, it's more difficult to divide our attention. It's more difficult to stay focused on a lecture for an extended period of time. Executive attention involves planning actions, thinking about what it is that you're going to do next, detecting errors. And so, for example, being able to identify the misplaced comma on the bullet above it on planning actions. You see at the end of planning actions, there's a comma there. That's an error that shouldn't be there. And so being able to detect errors is also part of executive attention. Monitoring progress, being able to think about, how far you are in completing a task, and then also dealing with novel or difficult circumstances. And so this again goes back to like abstract thinking, new situations, things that you've never experienced before, not having any sort of reliable framework for comparison. That can be a difficult or challenging thing to do as we get older, and that's part of executive attention. Remember that all of these cognitive functions, they peak in early adulthood. As we get older, in late adulthood, we're going to start to see a decline in all of these abilities. So cognitive functioning can be explained and described and categorized many different ways. When we look at memory specifically, we see that explicit memory, which involves personal experiences and factual information, this declines with age. And so being able to remember our personal experiences from childhood and early adulthood, being able to recall factual pieces of information like names and dates, we forget all of these things. And one of the reasons is because many of these pieces of knowledge we just don't use. We don't think about these things for many years, and so therefore they kind of just disappear from our memory. We forget about them. Now, there's also an important difference between prospective and implicit memory. So prospective memory is remembering to do something in the future. And so humans in general, this is a difficult task. It becomes more difficult in late adulthood, which is why it's important to have some sort of mnemonic aid, some sort of reminder, whether it be on your phone or a calendar or a watch. All of these things are helpful at reminding people to take out the trash, go grocery shopping, remember to take your medication, all of those things. Implicit memory, which involves skills and procedure like muscle memories, like walking and talking and typing and texting and cooking, tying our shoes, driving, these are less affected by aging. Wisdom is a term that we often associate with adulthood, maybe more specifically middle and late adulthood. Very rarely do we say a 22-year-old is very wise or a 15-year-old is very wise, but a 40-year-old or a 60-year-old, those people typically are assumed to have wisdom. What is wisdom? Well, it's defined as superior judgment about important matters of life. Obviously, this is a very vague definition because terms like superior and important are obviously subjective. What I consider superior or important may not be what you consider to be superior or important. So this is a very difficult concept to measure. We can all agree, however, that judgment about life and judgment about decision making about life matters seems to develop throughout adulthood. It comes with life experience. And so many people just associate wisdom with life experience, which I think is a fair comparison. or a fair analogy. We see that wisdom is associated with openness to new experiences, because if wisdom is associated with life experiences, well, the more experiences that you have, and especially the more different types of experiences that you have, the more the more experience you're going to be able to draw from when giving advice. Mentorships, and so the benefit of having someone in your life that you can mentor and guide and pass knowledge on down to, we see that as also a very beneficial aspect of wisdom. And being involved in a professional field concerned with life problems like nursing or education or criminal justice, all of those types of experiences, all those types of professions involve life issues that are not always going to be black and white. They're going to be very complex. And so when you compare that to, for example, being like maybe an electrical engineer, being an electrical engineer is a very noble and difficult field of study, and it's a very good profession. In fact, I think we can all agree it requires lots of education and it's great income. But the truth of the matter is that working with wires and working with computers doesn't provide a whole lot of life experiences or people problem solving opportunities that, for example, being a counselor might provide, or being a police officer might provide. And that's not to say that the electrical engineer can't get those experiences elsewhere. We just see that having a profession that works more with humans is going to provide us with more experiences in dealing with humans, because obviously when it comes to life and problems associated with life, many of those problems have to do with life and humans and our relationships. So when we compare the elderly in the 21st century compared to the elderly of the 20th century, we see a big difference. And part of that is due to a larger access to education that people in the 21st century, or the elderly in the 21st century had, that the elderly in the 20th century did not have. And so having these educational opportunities in the 1980s that didn't exist in the 1940s, that has made a significant change in essentially how intelligent and how efficient the cognitive functioning is of people in late adulthood in the year 2020. Many jobs in the 21st century and in the late 20th century also had to do with, a lot of jobs in the 21st century, they have a lot of cognitive functions associated with them. And this again goes back to the comparison of the electrical engineer to the counselor. But let's, instead of comparing an electrical engineer to a counselor, and not to say that one job is better than the other, they just differ in the way that they solve problems. Compare someone working on an assembly line in an automobile factory compared to someone being an electrical engineer. Or, being an electrical engineer, there's a lot more cognitive functions associated with that kind of task as opposed to someone who's bagging groceries or working on an assembly line. And so working on an assembly line, for example, that was a very popular job, in the 1950s and the 1960s. A lot of those jobs became automated by machines. And so, and that was in part, that was in part made possible by the fact that people were able to basically come up with those machines, which obviously involves a lot of cognitive functioning and a lot of electrical engineers. And then, of course, we see healthcare improvements as well. And so all of the healthcare advancements that we've had in the 21st century has essentially led to a better cognitive functioning population in late adulthood, because we know that healthcare is correlated with cognitive functioning. When it comes to work and retirement, we see that older adults are increasingly still working or returning to work. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. Some people just want to stay active. Some people can't afford to retire. But what we do see is that older adults tend to have lower rates of absenteeism. They tend to be more reliable when they show up to work. They tend to have fewer accidents, and they also tend to be more satisfied with their job than younger people. On average, 10 to 15% of life is spent in retirement. And so, on the previous slide, there was a video link to some questions associated with retirement. And I think that's just a question that, people in their 60s should be able to answer. Are they prepared for retirement? And if they are, whether or not they are or they aren't, what are some of the decisions that led up to that preparation or lack of preparation? What we see is that having a successful retirement, being financially prepared for retirement, is associated with a lot of things. First of all, these people tend to be in better health. They tend to have a better income. They tend to have a higher education. And they also tend to have more relationships, an extended social network, and a more extended family. And so having a larger family, having a higher education, having a higher income, all of those things seem to be associated with having a good and successful retirement. Regarding mental health in late adulthood, we see that depression is an issue. Some of the factors that contribute to depression in late adulthood include earlier depressive symptoms. So people who experience depression in adolescence and early adulthood are more likely to experience depression in late adulthood. People who are experiencing poor health or a disability in late adulthood are more likely to become depressed. Loss events such as the loss of a spouse, that is also linked to depression, and also just low social support. So not having a lot of social interaction, not having an extended family to interact with, all of those are contributors to major depression in late adulthood. We do see that 25% of all suicides occur in late adulthood. Alzheimer's disease is the progressive deterioration of cognitive functioning. We don't know the specific cause of Alzheimer's disease. We do know that at the physiological level, people with Alzheimer's disease, they have a deficiency in neurotransmitters like acetylcholine, and they also have the formation of protein buildups, which we refer to as plaques and tangles, which we believe interfere with cognitive functioning. There's no cure. But certain drugs do seem to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Support for individuals who have Alzheimer's disease can be physically and emotionally draining because you're having to deal with someone an adult whose cognitive functioning is extremely impaired. Parkinson's disease is another chronic issue for many people in late adulthood. It's characterized by chronic muscle tremors. These individuals typically move a lot slower, and many of them experience partial facial paralysis. It's caused by the degeneration of dopamine-producing neurons in the brain. So we have a lot of neurotransmitters in our nervous system. Dopamine is one that's associated with not only with pleasure, but also with physical movements. And so individuals who have Parkinson's disease, we see that they do not produce dopamine at a normal or regular rate, and so therefore they have to take L-Dopa, which is a synthetic version of dopamine. However, individuals can develop a tolerance to L-Dopa, and so they need to increase their dosage over time. That concludes cognitive development in late adulthood. I encourage you to watch all of the embedded videos in this PowerPoint to get a better understanding of the topics that we've discussed. The last component of late adulthood is going to be socio-emotional development. Here we see individuals in late adulthood interacting with one another, what looks to be at a rehabilitation center we see a walker. We see some physical therapy structures. We see some interaction, some individuals in late adulthood, gray hair, loose skin, loss of hair. All of those are indications of late adulthood. We'll begin by discussing theories of socio-emotional development in late adulthood, then move on to personality and self-esteem. We'll discuss societal issues in late adulthood. We'll talk about relationships in late adulthood. We'll look closely at the influence of ethnicity and gender. And then lastly, we'll talk about successful aging and the factors associated with successful aging. So regarding socio-emotional development, there are three theories that we should consider. The first is Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory of personality development. Erik Erikson believed that the eighth and final psychosocial crisis that we experience in late adulthood is integrity versus despair. Basically, can we as humans reflect on our life with feelings of satisfaction and accomplishment? At the age of 70, will we look back at our life and feel like we lived a good life, that we made good decisions and we were satisfied with our efforts and the things that we accomplished? Or are we going to feel like we wasted our life? That is going to make the difference between whether or not we experience integrity or despair. And so despair can lead to feelings of depression, anger, resentment, whereas integrity is associated with happiness and health and a positive outlook on the world and our own personal experience. Activity theory, basically saying that our life satisfaction or maybe even our sense of integrity is associated with involvement and purpose in society. And so what constitutes involvement and purpose in society? Being a parent, being a professional, being a part of a community, maybe being a member of a church. All of these things, show that we're active contributing members of society. And so I think that one of the ways that we can reach integrity is by being as productive as possible in middle adulthood. Socio-emotional selectivity theory basically states that as we go through life, the reason or the focus of our socialization is dependent on emotional satisfaction in late adulthood and the pursuit of knowledge in early adulthood. So as we go through early adulthood, I should say, yes, as we go through early adulthood, one of the things that pushes us to socialize, interact with others is typically learning things. We go to school to learn, and that's what we make connections with teachers and other students. We go to work and we try to get promotions and move up in the ladder. And a lot of that is about learning how the job works, how the industry works. Eventually, we feel like we've learned enough and we retire, and the rest of our life is typically spent not so much in search of new knowledge, but rather just feeling good and doing things that make us happy, like fishing. One last theory that we'll look at is selective optimization with compensation theory. It's a very wordy theory, but all it states is that as we get older, we have a reduction in our ability and functioning, whether it be our movement or our vision. And so therefore, what we must do is be a little bit more selective in the things that we do. We can't do everything anymore. And so we just need to be aware of that. We can't, walk 8 miles or, run 8 miles anymore. Some of us can, obviously, but that's, it's going to vary from individual to individual. And so those of us, for example, that struggle with walking, we might need to get a walker. Those of us who struggle with going up the stairs, we might need to get a machine that's pictured on the bottom left. We can maintain a lot of our skills through practice and the use of technology. And so with the invention of smartphones, that gives individuals in late adulthood a lot of opportunities to maintain certain skills like texting and typing and language. But of course, we also don't want to overcompensate. We don't want to rely entirely on walkers when we don't need them. And so, because obviously if we rely too heavily on support, that's only going to make us dependent on those things. Moving on to personality and self-esteem, we see that individuals who score high on conscientiousness tend to be associated with good health. So this was also established earlier in the lecture. Individuals that are more disciplined, more careful, and are more strategic, they tend to have better health. People who score higher on neuroticism, people that tend to worry a lot and be more nervous and self-pitying, they are more likely to develop depression. In general, our self-esteem tends to decline due to the following reasons: losing our spouse, being institutionalized, being put in a assisted living facility, or a physical impairment, such as being confined to a wheelchair. Low religious commitment. So what we see is that religiosity tends to be associated with positive self-esteem, and then again, declining health is often associated with low self-esteem. What are some of the societal issues that we have that mostly involves or concerns people of late adulthood? Well, first of all, there's ageism, the perception that older people are incapable or a strain on society, or even just assuming that old people are bad drivers, or that they're too slow. All of those are ageist ideas. And so some of them may face employment discrimination. So being 55 or 60 years old, or even 65 years old and trying to get a job, and if someone is picked at a job just for the sake of being younger, well, then that's ageist, and that's an example of discrimination. There has to be other reasons other than just specifically their age. Susceptibility to abuse and crime. Many people that are elderly are more likely to, or they're prone to being victimized because their cognitive capacities are not as sharp. They don't have the physical ability to defend themselves, so they're just targets for crime. Healthcare is a major issue. Many people in late adulthood are dependent on the government, so government-assisted healthcare, a form of socialized healthcare. The problem with healthcare in late adulthood is that the cost of healthcare is going to continue to increase. However, people's income typically does not increase. They may have a pension or a retirement savings account, but they do not continue to make more money, yet their healthcare costs continue to climb, and so that's an issue. And so, the concept of a socialized healthcare system for everyone, not just for people in late adulthood, that's certainly a major topic for debate in our society. Many people that are in late adulthood are dependent on others for day-to-day physical and emotional care, whether that be changing, bathing, feeding. And so being elderly is very much like being an infant in that we are very heavily dependent. Sometimes some of us are very heavily dependent on the physical care of others in order to survive. We see that the elderly living in poverty are more likely to experience physical and mental health issues. Some people in late adulthood live alone, which can lead to depression. Some of them live with family, and some of them live in a nursing home. These are some of the different possibilities of living arrangements. Regarding relationships in late adulthood, we see that marriages in late adulthood seem to have the highest level of satisfaction compared to marriage in other life stages. People that are married in late adulthood are typically expected to live longer. People who are divorced in late adulthood are more likely to have weaker family ties. The women are less likely to be financially stable. It's important to understand that women in late adulthood now, the majority of them, or many of them, did not have the educational and professional opportunities in their 20s and teens that many women have today. And so it's just more to understand that there is a major cultural difference between the women who are 70 years old and 75 years old today compared to the women that are 25 years old today that will be 75 in 50 years. They will just live different lives, or they will have a different outlook on life, I should say, financially speaking. And I'm just saying that's tied to the changes in employment discrimination against women that occurred 40, 50 years ago. So people that are divorced in late adulthood are more likely to have health issues. Remarriage in late adulthood is increasing due to a rising divorce rate, and so there's just more single adults out there. We see that because people are living longer, they're more available to remarry. As our life expectancy continues to increase, we'll see more remarriage in late adulthood, and then we just have a better healthcare system, and so people are just healthier in late adulthood on average than they used to be. We see that middle-aged children tend to coordinate services for their parents in late adulthood, whether it be their health care or their finances. Daughters are more likely to be involved than sons, and so that's a gender issue there. Volunteering. Volunteering in late adulthood provides constructive activities, provides a purpose, a sense of meaningful purpose. It provides an opportunity for social interaction, and also provides a sense of meaningfulness. With regard to ethnicity and gender, we see that minorities are more likely to experience racism. And so again, remember, we've seen a lot of societal changes over the past 60 or 70 years. The truth of the matter is that someone who is 85 to 90 years of age in the year 2020, that means that, let's say they're 85 in the year 2020, so they were likely to be born in 1935, if my math is correct. And so in 1955, they were 20 years of age. And so when you think about the culture of racial discrimination that existed in the 1950s and the 1960s, many of those people that grew up in that area are now in late adulthood. These minorities are more likely to become ill, but also less likely to receive treatment. For example, even with the coronavirus pandemic, we see that minorities are more likely to be affected, and they seem to have a higher death rate as well. Many minorities may never be eligible for Social Security or Medicare. Keep in mind that, for example, African American males have the lowest life expectancy, and so many of them are going to die before they retire. Gender. Women may experience sexism. I've already made the point about people who grew up in the 1940s and 50s that are experiencing late adulthood now. But we do see kind of a reversal in gender roles in that men are likely to become more sensitive and caring, as you can see in the picture here on the right. Typically, this kind of interaction we associate with the female gender role, reading and caring for children. Now that has changed drastically over the past 40 or 50 years, but again, we see men taking a much stronger and emotional role with caregiving for children and grandchildren. With regard to successful aging, being a healthy, happy 80-year-old and highly functioning, that is influenced by a lot of things that are probably predictable by this point. Being in good health, having an active lifestyle, having mental stimulation. So things like crosswords, Sudoku, or even just general employment, all of those things seem to be a positive contributor to successful aging. Strong social support, so being married, having children, having strong connections with your children, having friends, networking, being involved in the community, church, religious organizations, all of those things can provide social support. And of course, having positive coping skills. What does that mean? Drinking is not a positive coping skill for stress and anxiety. Exercise is a positive coping skill. Talking to people is a positive coping skill. So it's important that we develop these positive coping skills early in life so that way we can have them at our access when we reach late adulthood. That concludes development in late adulthood.